How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And today I have the pleasure of talking to Robert Venditti. I probably should have asked you ahead of time. Is it Venditti? Venditti?
So the second way you said it is the way people in Italy would actually say it. But
How do you like to say it?
my family pronounces it Vendetti, like it's Vindetti. But I pronounce it Venditti because when I used to say it the way my family said it, everybody would misspell my name, like in articles and whatnot. So I say Venditti. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now I'm caught. Like, do I want to make your family happy or you? So I don't. I'm kind of caught in the middle. Like,
You can go either way. My grandma's not watching, so I wouldn't sweat it too much.
Okay, well, it's good. It's good to finally meet you, Robert. I know we've talked at conventions before, and right before we got started, we started talking about how rare it is that a publishing company will announce two omnis back to back, a volume 1 and a volume 2 of a creator-centric omni, and we were talking about the Green Lantern volumes 1 and 2 by you.
By me, yeah. I think that's my first sort of big, thick omnibus. Like I've only had hardcover collections of my stuff and things like that, but that's my first. That real big. If you can't see under my table over here, but under my coffee table, I've got Gotham Central, Doom Patrol, Commandy, Fourth World. It'll be my first one. It's like a big, thick one like that.
That's got your name on it.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's got to be a good feeling, right? Like Green Lantern by, and then one day, who knows? Maybe we will get a Hawkman.
I would love Hawkman for sure.
Same.
Yeah, I would love Hawkman for sure. Hopefully, Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, will get collected too. Because that's what we're doing now is my new 52 Green Lantern run. It's not going to include any of the Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps stuff. So hopefully that will come later. Hawkman would be great. Hopefully I'll get to do some more Superman 78. Maybe we can do a little omnibus of those, But yeah, I would love it. I keep 3 copies of everything that I've ever done in case like my kids or my grandkids want them someday, So if I get the omnibuses, then I can get rid of my 3 copies of all of my trades.
I love this idea of 3 copies. Yeah. That's a good idea. And how I know we're here to talk about Bad Ideas, Planet Death, which we will get into. But how did you get started in the world of comic books and graphic novels? Because I know you've done work at Valiant with XL Manowar, which is excellent, by the way.
Yeah,
but DC, I think, is what at least me, I started noticing your name. I was like, oh, this is really good, because it was a follow-up to the Jeff Johns run on Green Lantern.
Yeah, oh boy.
And right? Yeah.
Jumped in with both feet there. So I didn't start out reading comics. I didn't read comics at all growing up, So I started reading comics in like my late 20s. And I always wanted to be a writer. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always writing stories and doing things like that. So I took creative writing in high school, was an English major in college, was in the process of getting my master's degree in creative writing. When I read my first comic, I decided I wanted to try to write those, but I had never read them. I didn't know anything about the business. So I started out in the industry by volunteering to pack boxes in the warehouse of Top Shelf Comics, which is now they're an imprint of IDW, but at the time they were a very new kind of small press type, literary style comics publisher. It was based outside Atlanta where I live. So I started out working in their warehouse, packing boxes and things. And that role grew to doing the conventions, editing books, pretty much everything. I was the first employee the company ever hired. And while I was there, I wrote the script for my first comic, which was called The Surrogates. And I gave
that was your first comic?
That was my first comic, yep. And I gave it
I don't know if you're aware of this, sir, or not, but they based a movie on that.
They did, yes, I am aware. I don't know if too many other people are aware based on the box office receipts.
That's your first work, and they got a movie?
That was my first book, yeah.
Wow. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so when I wrote the script for The Surrogates, I gave it to Chris Staros. who was the editor of the company then, and I said, this isn't what you guys normally do. It's sort of mainstream cyberpunk sci-fi. But if you think it's good enough, maybe you introduce me to somebody like, Dark Horse or Vertigo or something that would be interested in it. He read it and was like, no, we actually like it. We'd like to do it ourselves. So they published it, and like you just said, that through like a crazy bunch of circumstances, ended up getting adapted into a film, and that really sort of put me on the map as a creator in terms of talking to editors and things like that. And so from Surrogates, I did another creator-owned project at Top Shelf, and then I started adapting all the Percy Jackson and the Olympians novels. I made comics out of those, and then from there I started working at Valiant, and then Valiant DC, and I guess the rest is history.
Wow, that's got to be a great feeling, right? Like your very first comic published, and finding out that it's getting a movie adaptation.
Yeah, it was certainly wasn't anything I anticipated. When I wrote the book, I hope somebody would publish it. I was sure nobody would read it, but I would have a copy of my work in my hand that I could hand to editors and use as a resume piece to get additional work. And that was really the most I hope to get out of it, because that first publication credit is really the hardest thing, And so when all the movie stuff happened, certainly wasn't anything I anticipated. It was a ton of fun, It certainly it was a really cool experience. I guess for a lot of the ancillary reasons, like I ended up being part of Brett Waddley, the artist, and I ended up being part of a Jeopardy answer. So like my grandmother's watching Jeopardy and she sees my name as one of the clues on Jeopardy, like things like that are just crazy, like I come from a blue collar family, I was the first person in my family to ever graduate from college. My family's construction workers and electricians, and very blue collar, and so
cool.
So it was really cool in that regard.
Does your family know, like, talking about comics is so different, right? Especially when people aren't aware of what exactly they are. But do they know what your role is when it comes to comics? Like,
I mean, to an extent, like I don't think my dad or my grandmother or anybody ever read any of my stuff. My mom certainly has. My friends that I grew up with, I got the same friends I've had ever since I was a kid. None of them know anything about what I do, have ever read a comic. And like my one buddy, one of my best friends down in South Florida, a neighbor of his moved in, and they were just talking one day, and the guy's talking about how he's kind of a comic book guy and he likes Green Lantern. And I was the writer of Green Lantern at the time, And he's like, oh, my buddy's Robert Venditti. And he was like, what? Your friend is Robert Venditti? And like, my friend has never read. So if you look at the 4 images back there, these are 4 splash pages. I don't know how well you can see them, but 4 splash pages from Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps. I wrote Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps as me and my 3 friends growing up, because one of us has a John personality, one has a Guy, one has a Hal, one has a Kyle personality. And so the guy I'm talking about now is the Hal, right? And so he tells his neighbor.
Did you tell him that?
Yeah, I've told him that. And so he tells his neighbor, he says that like I'm like the Hal Jordan character he thinks about when he writes the 4 together, and his buddy's like, do you know what that means? He's like, I have no idea who Hal Jordan is.
It is called Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern.
Yeah, and like the guy who's the Kyle, he was at New York for his own job just by coincidence one year when I was at New York Comic Con. So we crashed together, and he came to one of the DC parties with me, and I was introducing him to people, and they were like, which one are you? And I was like, oh, this is Kyle Rayner. And he has no idea what that means. And so like Ken Marion, who I did a bunch of Green Lantern issues with, he's a super cool guy. Kyle Rayner's like his favorite,
Yeah.
Like, this is Kyle Rayner, and my buddy's like, I don't know what any of this
means. It's so funny when worlds collide and you have the normal thing, or the muggles that come into this world of the geeks and all the people that love this kind of stuff, especially at conventions, because that's another level, right? Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, Robert, I've got friends that are alien books and Alien Publishing that is publishing Valiant comics these days.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When are we going to get a big, fat collection? Because you wrote a lot of issues of X-O Manowar.
I did. I think I wrote 57, and it's got to still be true. I think it's the longest unbroken run on a Valiant character, any Valiant character in history. And like nobody's written more than 57 issues.
That's a lot of issues, man. That would make a big fatty.
It would. I think Alien did a paperback of like the first 12 or 14 or something.
Mm-hmm. I'm waiting for another wave of those. Those have been excellent because I had never read that era of Valiant. My Valiant was from the 90s. And when the 2012 Valiant came out, I was out, like, I had missed a couple of the deluxe hardcovers, and it's not like I'm snooty about it, but even the trade paperbacks were really hard to find. So what happened was I was like, I'll just wait for a reprint, and the reprint never came.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta ask this, Dan. Dan saying Robert Venditti or Venditti once helped me find my toddler when he wandered off at the Bay. Oh, the Bad Idea Tiki Party. True story. And Bad Idea is notorious for their tiki parties.
They are, yes. Not the first time that's happened, actually. There's been a couple times at conventions and things when I've helped people locate their kids. I've got kids myself, so I know how. Dan is joking, by the way. He knew where his kid was. He's not a derelict parent, but I've certainly been in places where there's been a kid who's lost, and I've helped.
They come looking for you.
Yeah, help them find their folks. But Bad Idea does do tiki parties every year. They're doing a tiki party again this year. They just announced, so people can RSVP for that now. I believe you have to have a gold button to get in. I do not have a gold button, but I think I might be able to get in through some connections I have potentially.
I hope so.
But yeah, last year was the first one I went to, and it was a ton of fun. They do it at Roy's Hawaiian outside San Diego, outside the Inner Harbor, and it's great. So if you have San Diego this year, definitely drop by.
I will be attending next year. This year got the press passes are just insane for San Diego Comic-Con. Like, I had no idea you had to be in so early. Most cons are normal. They're like 6 months ahead or whatever. This was like 8-9 months.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot happening, and I thought, oh, no. Yeah. X-O Manowar relaunched the Valiant line. How did that come about, and how does it feel kicking off a whole entire universe of comics? How did that come about? Because, I mean...
Yeah, it's a cool question. So, going back to Surrogates, after that was collected, prior to the movie coming out, I was actually in New York City for New York Comic Con, one of the early ones, back when it was still in February. And I was there because Touchstone Films was going to roll out their PR campaign for the Surrogates film at that convention. And they were going to have a panel there and things. And so while I was in New York, I went and visited the Marvel offices. First time I was ever there. Again, just using that book as a resume piece to meet editors and things. One of the editors that I met there was Warren Simons, and I gave him a copy of the book. This would have been 2009. And then it was about 2.5 years later that Valiant was going to relaunch. Warren had that book, and he had read it, and he'd remembered my writing. So he reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to pitch on any of the characters. Now, going back to what I said earlier, didn't read comics growing up, and I'm always very upfront about that. And so I said to him, not only have I never heard of any of those characters you just mentioned, I've never heard of Valiant. Like, I don't even know what that is, because I started reading comics in like 2000, right?
Okay.
And he was like, great. That's exactly what I would want. I would want somebody who doesn't know anything about these characters to come in and give them, a fresh take. And so he was interested originally in me doing Bloodshot, I think, because of like the tech and the cyber aspects and things. And it's kind of relatable to Surrogates and stuff, When I looked at all the characters, X-O Manowar was the one that I liked. I don't know that this is Valiant's flagship character. I have no idea. It just seemed like a really cool concept and something that I wouldn't be able to do anywhere else. With every project that I do, I try to do something that's new and different and, not repeat the same kind of story. And so X-O Manowar is a, Visigoth who gets abducted by aliens and in the 5th century and comes back to Earth in the modern day, time displaced in a suit of sentient alien armor. Like, when am I ever going to do that again, right? And so I put my pitch together for that, and they liked it, and ended up picking it to be, the first book. There were 4 books that really launched the relaunch. There was mine, X-Men War came out first. I did that with Terry Nord. Then came Josh Dysart and Kari Evans on Harbinger, phenomenal book. Then after that, I believe, was Dwayne Straczynski and can't remember the artist who did Bloodshot. And then Fred Van Lente did Archer and Armstrong. And that was like the 4 titles that launched the original Valiant universe. And so I think they probably let out with it because it was the flagship character and they liked the pitch. But it was a huge gamble for everybody because I had never written a mainstream comic in my life. I had never done anything serialized,
Wow,
I had done 5 issues of Surrogates. I had done 2 original graphic novels for Top Shelf, and then I had adapted some of the Percy Jackson graphic novels. That was it. That's all I'd done. I'd never done a monthly comic book series of any kind or anything superhero, And so for them to put that as the first book in the slate and launch the company with it was a risk for them and also for me because it could go down in flames, and then I'm going to be in bad shape too. But we worked real hard on it. Carrie is obviously a phenomenal talent, and ended up doing well. And from that, things just started to kind of snowball. I did a couple of events for them. Around the same time, I was talking to Valiant before X-Men War had come out. I got approached by them and was talking to some editors there. And so after X-Men War came out, I started doing Demon Knights at DC, and then from Demon Knights, I went right into Green Lantern. So, but when I started on Green Lantern after Jeff Johns, I think I had probably published 5 comic books in my whole career.
Man, this is so crazy. Like to hear that because, so, like I said, I was out of the Valiant stuff when, except for when Alien launched that new line, and I finally got to read your work of XO. And when I found out there were 50 plus issues, including issue 0, I was like, well, that would make a nice Omni. The stuff that I read in Green Lantern, it gave me the Jeff Johns type of vibe, that not the same way that he writes, but more like, obviously this is a fan of the book, and now this fan has turned into a writer. I had no idea that you had not.
Yeah, when they asked me to pitch for Green Lantern, I said, I'll be straight. Like I said, I'm always honest. I said,
Yeah.
I know what he looks like. I know what the visual of Green Lantern looks like because of cartoons and things when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I know he's green. I'll be honest, I don't know what the lantern does. There's a lantern, like I didn't know there was a lantern, And so, again, they were like, "That's cool, we would like to hear." I think what I always like to say, I've said this in a lot of interviews, but what I always like to say is you can't fake stupid, And so the one thing I have going for me that I think separates me from other writers is when I am asked about Hawkman or Green Lantern or X-Men War or any of those things, I legitimately know absolutely nothing about that character. And so I haven't been reading it my whole life. I don't have all these baked in preconceptions about the characters or continuity hangups or any of these kinds of things. Whatever the idea I come up with is just going to be what I'm inspired by just learning about the character in the here and now and sort of immediate thing. And that's different from a lot of other comic book writers that have been fans of comics their whole lives and know these characters and continuities and crossovers and all this kind of stuff, right? So what I mean by you can't fake stupid is if I had been a comic book writer my whole life and it came to the pitch time, I couldn't pretend that I didn't know all that stuff. I couldn't pretend that I didn't know that Carter Hall, the ancient Egyptian archaeologist, or the ancient Egyptian, and Qatar Hole, the Thanagarian space cop, are 2 completely separate people. I didn't know that. I just assumed that it was all one Hawkman umbrella, because I don't know that there was a golden age and a silver age and that there's been all these confusing continuity things and whatnot.
Okay, can you give me an insight as to how that works though? Because it works completely fine whenever you're dealing with Exo Manowar, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of given like a basic template of anything, and it's starting over a new universe. Whereas Green Lantern is an established character. Granted, after, of course, Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's a different character than he was in the Silver Age.
Yeah.
But did editors have to talk to you and say, okay, these are kind of like the basic things about the character?
Yeah, they did a little bit. They explained the emotional spectrum to me and things like that. And then I asked them to send me, all the recent trades, and so I basically read all the lead-in stuff to Blackest Night and then what came after,
Yeah.
So I knew I could understand what the emotional spectrum is and things. But I was reading it all fresh. I didn't know, about Emerald Crisis and Parallax and, the animosity that the Kyle fans get from Hal fans. I mean, I don't know any of these things. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
I'm just thinking about it in terms of story and what are these puzzle pieces? There's an emotional spectrum, and this guy used to be a fighter pilot, and his dad died when he was little, and this other guy's, this is what Guy Gardner's like, and these are all little puzzle pieces that I learn about as I'm trying to think about them in terms of story and what I would do with them. And so you just kind of start moving the puzzle pieces around and come up with something. And so when I started on Green Lantern, again, I had very little experience as a mainstream comic book writer. Done, like I say, 5 issues maybe I published. And so I think if you start with my first issue, which is Green Lantern, New 52 Green Lantern 21, and you go all the way to the end of Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, quote number 50, what I hope is that you can see basically my evolution in becoming a writer happening on the page in real time, because you're seeing me write Green Lantern number 21, which is, again, I've written 5 comic books prior to that, all the way up to now I've done 87 issues of Green Lantern by the end. Plus I've done X-Men of War and Wrath of the Eternal Warrior and Flash and all these other things. And I, when I started out on Green Lantern, it was a bit of a rocky start. I mean, I'm following Jeff Johns, one of the modern masters of the medium, who was also chief creative officer of DC Comics at the time. Nobody knows these characters better. And I'm coming from a place where I'm very new to all this. I think if you read all that as one piece, I'm a better writer by the end than I was in the beginning. And really that's what I would hope to get out of every project that I worked on, and I got a lot of pushback and animosity, and still to this day, there's people who will say, I can't stand Robert Venditti. He's the worst Green Lantern writer ever, which is totally fine,
but that comes, that you wear that with a badge of honor. I'm sure you've talked to Ron Mars about this, because when Ron Mars took over the book, he's the one that introduced Kyle Rayner, right? Yeah. And it was he's the one that was given the job to make Hal Jordan a villain and make Hal Jordan kill the Green Lantern Corps. And people will remember that always. But then to a lot of people, that was their first Green Lantern. Was was it the artist on the book that said Kyle's my Green Lantern?
Oh, Ken Marion. Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly.
And my editor, Andrew Marino, who's great. I mean, I've worked with Andrew on tons of things. He's a Kyle guy. Kyle is his Green Lantern.
And I know there's a lot of people that are super excited for the Green Lantern Omni, both volumes 1 and 2, to have all your stuff there. I mean,
so like I say, you'll be able to see me evolve in real time, which I think, I don't know, I'm proud of that, and I understand that people didn't like my early stuff as much as they like Jeff Johns' stuff, but that's okay. I doubt that Jeff Johns on his 5th comic book wrote like Jeff Johns too, So
I think that as a fan of comics, it's one of those things you get used to your home, right? And if your home is 17 years of X-Men by Chris Claremont, whoever, doesn't matter, the next writer is going to be, then that shakes up your home, and it's this is new. I don't like it.
I mean, it's totally possible. There are people out there that grew up on my Green Lantern run, and when Grant Morrison came in and took over, we're like, who's this hack? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Absolutely. It's always like that. I think it's just, and it's not just comics, right? I think of Doctor Who.
Sure. And that's what I mean. I don't blame fans for it at all. And they're paying with their hard-earned money. This is their entertainment dollar, and all that kind of stuff. So it's totally fine. I get it. I just don't let it get to me, because I'm realistic about knowing that, first of all, it's writing. It's art. You're never going to solve it, right? And so there could be somebody who says I'm the worst writer ever, and somebody who says I'm the best writer ever, and they're both right and they're both wrong, because It's completely, subjective. So I just don't let it. I don't let it bother me. I don't sit down and when I took that job, I wasn't like, let me see what I can do to be better than Jeff Johns. You'd paralyze yourself, Like, let me just see what I can do as a writer and learn from it and become a better writer the next time and become a better writer the next time and hopefully just keep becoming a better writer.
Yeah, you know what it kind of reminds me of a little bit. I don't know if you probably know this now, and you probably met her, but Nancy Collins, who was a novelist.
I know who. I never met Nancy, but I know who she is. Yeah,
she's a wonderful lady. She took Swamp Thing not immediately after Alan Moore came on board, but it's like Alan Moore shook up Swamp Thing so much that no matter who took over the run afterwards, wasn't going to do anything like Alan Moore. And you don't want somebody to do that, right? You don't want to keep that going. Otherwise, people get upset. I think you did an amazing job. I mean, obviously, the editors and the fans liked it. If they kept you on the book for that many, how many, 87 issues? Is that right?
I think it's 87. Yeah, I'd have to put them in my head again, but it was 50. Let's see, it was 32 plus 2 plus 3 annual, so 55 and new 52. And then Haldor and the Greek Baron Corps was 51 issues. So that's 86, right? I think I'm missing an annual. So yeah, 87 issues. Yeah.
And you were doing Hawkman at the same time too.
Hawkman came in. Did they overlap?
I think your first volume of Hawkman did.
Yeah, maybe the tail end of Green Lantern. Yeah, but in between, I had done Flash.
I get things in collected edition, so I never remember when they
were. Yeah.
But I know that first trade, I think it was in 2019 when it came out, and you were still on Green Lantern at the time. You started that with Brian Hitch. Hell of an artist too. Amazing. And that book, that book, Hawkman, really needs somebody like that with a fresh eye on the character, because the character of Carter's so complicated, super complicated. And I know other writers have tried to simplify things, like even Jeff Johns. Like, okay, we can't keep all the origins of Carter. It's going to get really confusing to people.
Yeah. That's what appealed to me about the character. I didn't know anything about Hawkman except that he had a reputation for being the most confusing character in comics.
So you took it upon yourself to be like, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, I was like, I want to see if we can figure out a way to make sense of it. And literally within the first 20 minutes of me reading about Hawkman on Wikipedia, I figured out what I would do with the character.
Oh, that's. But
again, awesome. It's because I didn't read comics growing up, and I don't have all that baked in stuff. I was able to just come to it a different way, and working with Brian on the book was just an absolute gift, because Brian is, aside from being a phenomenal artist, a phenomenal visual storyteller, a good writer and creative mind in his own right, and just an amazing collaborator. One of the most positive experiences I've ever had working in comics is those first 12 issues that he and I did together, and super proud that we were able to leave a stamp on the character that,
Well, I hope we get an Omni out of that too, for selfish reasons, because that volume 2 is out of print of that trade paperback series.
Yeah, I think that might have been. I think that might have been COVID related.
That one came out in 2020. So
yeah,
at that time,
they printed it in the midst of all those paper shortages, and so DC did a lot of things went out of print in that era because they were faced with the decision of, do we reprint something and use the paper that we can get for that, or do we use the paper to print the new things that have to come out? And I think that's what happened there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, it was one that I definitely missed, and I thought, I'll just get it, when it comes back to stock. And then by the time I went to buy 4, it's like, I'll just get 2, 3, and 4. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It even happens to me that runs this channel that's supposed to keep tabs on these things. But yeah. Okay. Because of your work at Valiant, is that how you got with Bad Idea? Because like I just told you before we got started, I finished reading The Pizza Detective, and it was freaking awesome. Like, I really enjoyed this. This was really good. Hank Howard, Pizza Detective, by Robert Venditti and David Lapham. Now, the book that you're currently working on, though, is Planet Death.
Yeah. So Bad Idea, I did get to know all them really well. I'm trying to think. I worked for Valiant probably about 5 years, on various things, and so a lot of the people from Valiant started a Bad Idea, and I knew them from there, and so I started working for them, kind of in the beginning. Um, their first book was called ENIAC. It was Matt Kent and Doug Braithwaite, and then after that, their second book was a book called Tankers that I did with Juan Jose Reap, who's been drawing Wolverine for a while now. And so that was how I got together with Bad Idea. They're coming out with a new slate that launches in July with Planet Death, which comes out July 9th. That's going to be the launch of Bad Idea's new slate. They've kind of been on hiatus for about 18 months, building a bunch of stories in the background. And so Planet Death is a book that I co-wrote with the John Wick creator, Derek Kolstad, and the artist is Tomas Giarello. And I also have in that slate a book called Survive, which is a espionage type story that I wrote with Doug Braithwaite on art. And that comes out in September. And then in November, I have a book called Ordained, which is a more grounded sort of crime story. And that's I wrote that, and Trevor Hairsine is the artist on that. So got quite a few books in the Bad Idea slate coming up.
Wow, you are busy. What's the pitch that you would give somebody for Planet Death, since that's the next one that's coming up through?
Yeah, so Derek had this great idea for Planet Death, which is
because you said John Wick, and I know that caught a lot of people.
Yeah. Derek Kolstad, the guy who created John Wick, he had a great idea for Planet Death where he wanted to do sort of a wide scale war story set in space. So it's very much like a D-Day invasion type story, where humanity has to invade this alien planet to destroy this weapon. The entire battalion of soldiers, they come in on their drop ships, and they parachute, and they charge, and all these kinds of things. And if the soldiers are able to destroy the weapon, they're going to get to go home. But the entire battalion gets wiped out, except for our main character, which is named Corporal Scott. So now he has to figure out how to destroy the weapon on his own, so he can get to go home. And it's his journey across this alien world against these impossible odds, lots of turns and twists and things along the way. But a real gift to be able to work with somebody of Derek's caliber and talk story with him and see how he thinks about story. Writing is such a sort of a solitary existence. You kind of just sit in your house and you write all day, So it's nice when you get those opportunities to be collaborative with other writers and see how they do it and learn from them. And so super proud of that. Tomas Giarello is inking himself for the first time in a really long time. The art is phenomenal. It's going to be 4 issues. They're all oversized. They're all 40 pages. Issue 4 is 53 pages. So we're really going all out with this thing, and very, very excited to have it on the stands.
I know I'm going to reach out to Sienna, actually, who put all this together. So a big shout out to her, by the way. The book itself, like when it comes out in collected edition, I think it's going to be also available for retailers, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the single issues are available for retailers. Anybody can order them through Lunar right now.
Okay.
Yeah. The Bad Idea had when they first started out, they had a more limited distribution format where they were available. I think it was in 300 stores around the world. But with this new slate and with Planet Death, this is the first time that they've been distributed. Anywhere any retailer gets comics, they can get.
Oh man, dude, that is wonderful, because I know. I know that Sienna told me that it was going to be the trade. I didn't know the single issues were also going to be available. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, Sienna might have been talking about the Hero Trade, which is a collection that's coming out the same month as Planet Death #1, and that collects Matt Kent and Dave Lapham's everything they've done with the Hero Trade universe up to this date. That'll be in July as well. But yeah, I mean, hopefully Planet Death gets collected at some point, and we can do a nice hardcover like Hank Howard Pizza Detective there, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, these are beautiful hardcovers.
Yeah, they do an amazing job with those. Yeah.
So yeah, I can't wait to see what the finish hardcover will look like with Planet Death. Because there's amazing. Let me see if I can share this. So you've got how many books with them so far?
That have already been published, or that will be coming out?
That will be coming out. Maybe you're not.
In this new slate, I have Planet Death, Survive, and Ordained. Those 3 books are all part of this new slate.
Okay.
They're all 4-issue miniseries.
And what else are you working on these days?
Oh boy, let's see. So I work with Mr. Baldwin, the podcaster, the true crime podcaster. If you're familiar with him, he's, I think,
somebody mentioned him earlier.
The number one, I believe, the number one podcaster on Amazon.
That's huge.
Yeah, so I do. It's like strange, dark, mysterious, true crime, a little bit of horror type stuff. And so I do graphic novels of his stories. The first book came out last October. Made it to number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list, which was cool. So we just sent number 2 to the printer that will be out this October, and we're working on the 3rd one. So I'm doing those. Sorry about that. And then, gosh, what else am I working on? A couple of other things for Bad Idea that are already in the can.
Okay.
A couple of other projects that haven't been announced yet. So yeah, I'm keeping pretty busy. Yeah.
And I am going to show what some of these pages look like for Planet Death because they are amazing. And let me see here. It doesn't do it justice, but like,
yeah, I know.
Detail and oh man,
Tomas is just amazing to work with.
Yeah. Definitely has that like European flair that I love about his art. And you said he's inking himself?
He's inking himself for the first time in a very, very long time. Yeah.
These the double page spreads that really get me excited. That is killer. Let me show you what the actual spaceship here looks like. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
4 issues.
4 issues. Yeah.
Man, it looks good. I can't wait to see the physical format and oversized. That's gonna look great.
Yeah.
Any other character you would like to work on that you don't know anything about?
Yeah, so there are 2 characters. Working at DC all those years I did, you get to a point where you start to learn about the characters because you're keeping up with the universe. You're reading the books as they come out.
Yes, sir.
So, because you want to know where all the moving pieces are going, especially if you're working on something like Green Lantern that might have to plug into an event or something like that. So I would love to do JSA. And
you did the Sandman.
I did Sandman, yeah.
That was excellent.
Yeah, that if I was to do a JSA series, that would have been one of my story arcs. That would have been a Wesley Dodds focus.
Wesley Dodds. Oh, that was excellent. Yeah,
I appreciate that. And Nightwing is another character that I would really like to do. I really have any interest in Batman at all. Superman is my favorite character. To be able to do the Superman 78 books was like the dream of all dreams.
How did that go about?
So as I said before, I don't know anything about any of the characters. The one thing I would always say that I knew about was the Christopher Reeve Superman film because I watched them when I was a kid. So when Andrew Marino was putting that project together along with Batman '89, he reached out to me and he was like, I finally got one that you've heard of, and so yeah, was very, very happy to do that. So that's not even like what you would call a dream gig from the sense I never thought that gig would happen to dream about it, because 1978, like if they were going to make comics out of this, they would have done it already, and so that was really a dream come true to be able to work on that story and for it to be able to have the success and the reception that it had from the fans.
That movie, really nice. That was excellent. It was emotional. I loved it. I thought it was a great book.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Because those movies are special to me and a lot of people of my generation, right? I remember my dad taking me to the theater to see it, and now we have the new Superman movie coming out.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most people in the world, that's their version of Superman, and certainly for me, like some people, John Byrne's Superman is their Superman, or Dan Jurgens' Superman is their Superman, whatever have you. Like Christopher Reeve is my Superman. That's the Superman I grew up with. I never read any of the comics. I just knew it from the films, and so when we sat down to do Superman 78, Wilfredo Torres and I did the first story together. Then Gavin Guidry came in and did the second story. Just really wanted to capture those voices and those expressions and that version of those characters, whether it be Lex, Lois, Perry, Clark, whoever it was.
Yeah, you all did a phenomenal job. was hoping a lot more.
I've got another idea for another story. We'd love to do another one. Yeah,
Nightwing would be great.
Yeah, so the reason why I like Nightwing is because I don't have any interest in Batman at all. Do not care about Batman. Don't want to write Batman. Doesn't matter. But to me, Nightwing is kind of the Clark Kent Superman of the Batman family. He's the most hopeful one. And so I think I've got an idea for something I'd like to do for Nightwing.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's my favorite character at DC Comics.
Oh, there you go.
That's so true. What prose authors are you influenced by? Since you didn't read comics, this is an excellent question.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. It's hard to say. Like everything's just kind of in there. You know what I'm saying? What I read a lot when I was growing up, I read a lot of Tom Clancy. I read a lot of Stephen King. Didn't read much outside that growing up. I was very active in sports growing up. I played basketball. I ran cross country and I ran track. So I always had a job. So I was always working in things or at practice of some kind or another. During grad school and stuff, or getting my English degree, I definitely leaned more towards the contemporary American writers as opposed to, British lit or something like that. So Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Russell Banks, Louise Erdrich, stuff like that, was what I was really steeped in and what I was reading around the time that I read my first comic. What I liked about those stories was how character focused they were. All-time favorite novel is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck.
I love that book. Wow.
And so what really impressed me about those things was how character-centered those stories were. And when I read my first comic, which was Kurt Busiek's Astro City, Volume 2, Number 4, the first issue of the Confession story arc, here was all that character-centered literary style of influence, but in the comic book medium. And that was what made me decide that I wanted to try to do that. Could I sort of take all these principles of things I've been learning in creative writing classes, writing prose fiction and all that kind of stuff, and apply them to the visual medium of comics. And that's kind of what set me on my way.
You have such an interesting background that it's a lot different than the stories that I know I'm used to hearing whenever I ask people like, hey, how did you get into comics? And it's usually the same kind of thing. Like, oh, I read comics, or my brother or my dad, and I got into comics at a young age. And you came from a different angle. And I love hearing that because it just shows you, how open the world of comics is and how there is a need for people that my brain works in the chronological order of things that happened in comic books.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes you need someone that doesn't think like that. That can be a fresh start for some new readers, because we do need new readers.
Yeah, and I always try to write for the new reader because I am that new reader. Like I'm that mythological. They say everybody, every comic book is somebody's first comic book. Like I'm that person who was in their late 20s and was trying to get into the business and trying to read these stories and found a lot of the continuities to be very alienating. And so
yeah,
with everything that I do, I try to make it new reader friendly. So that. It's a delicate balance, right? Like you want it to be something that new readers can pick up and they can get on board, but you don't want it to be something that established readers would be bored of, So you want to have enough of the continuity and the subplots and things to keep long-running readers going, but not so much that it alienates people who are coming to the book for the first time. It's a delicate balance, and it's one that I'm always trying to walk.
And I think you did a great job because, like I said, when reading your Green Lantern, I was like, oh, this guy obviously came from a fan's perspective and grew up reading Green Lantern. I love that. This gentleman has a lot of questions, but I do like the last question. Do you think Hawkman was interrupted by death metal?
It definitely was. Yeah. There were two stories, two crossovers back to back.
Yeah.
And Hawkman got swept. Only Hawkman and Supergirl got swept up in both of them. One was Villains United, and the other one was a storyline called Infected, which is not death metal. Death metal is something else. I think Infected might have eventually led to death metal, And so those two stories came in and definitely interrupted what we were doing. But I feel like I was able to make them become a part of the series in an organic way that didn't feel like it was too disruptive. That's not a negative. That's sort of that's the gig when you work at a shared universe of 52 characters or whatever that are getting published all at the same time. There are going to be crossovers. There are going to be events. That's part of the job, So you have to be able to adjust to those things, and it interrupted them, but it also led to creative solutions that I would never have come up with if not for that. So, for example, if not for the Infected storyline, I never would have thought of a past life of Hawkman that was evil, that was, from what's the Earth where Ultraman is from?
Zero, right?
No, it's not Zero.
Or Prime. No Prime. Hold on.
It's where Ultraman and Earth 2. There you go. Yeah. So there was, so we created an evil Hawkman past life that was from that Earth, and made it a part of the Infected storyline. So without crossover, sometimes you wouldn't have some of the stories that you get. So.
Did that happen while you were writing Green Lantern? Well, I mean, I know it happened. There were crossovers. And how did you go about, like, you came into Green Lantern not knowing really the characters of like Hal or Kyle or John, but then when there were crossovers with like Sinestro, for example, how did you approach that?
Well, by that point, I had once I get the job, I'm going to be writing Hawkman. I go read every issue of Hawkman that I can read.
3.
Yeah, there you go. Earth 3. There you go. Yeah. I go read every issue of Hawkman that I can get my hands on. I read hundreds of issues of Green Lantern.
Research. You do research.
But I don't do that before I get the job, because that's a whole lot of work that I might not even get the job. But once they say you're writing Green Lantern, I say send me everything you got, and I read hundreds of issues of it.
Got you. Okay, that's an excellent approach. I like that.
Yeah.
I like coming in with a fresh take, but you still have to do the work. You still have to do the research. Yeah. So, so by the time you were writing Green Lantern, you already knew who the character of Sinestro was, because you had read the Jeff Johns stuff.
Yep.
And you kind of knew where he was.
Knew about the Sinestro Corps and Arquillo and, all that stuff. Yeah.
And then I guess even though it was the New 52, Green Lantern really wasn't that rebooted like a lot of, like, I know Superman was rebooted. Wonder Woman was starting over again from scratch. But Green Lantern was one of those characters that remained very changed from the previous run that came.
I would agree with that. Yeah, they kept that continuity going. Yeah.
And they're asking about Damage. I see questions about Damage. Any more plans?
Let's do some rapid fires here. So the other guy had a question, or I'm assuming it's a guy. The other person had a question earlier about the hand at the end of Godhead that came to the source wall. That was going to be an entire storyline. That storyline got scrapped. We never did anything with that character because it went into Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps. The book became something very different, and we just went a different direction. So that answers that. Damage. No plans to go back to Damage. That was a bit of an experiment that we did. I get a lot of questions about Damage. A lot of people like the book. The character appeared in what's the show that's up? My Adventures with Superman, I think is the name of the cartoon. It was in season 2 for a few brief moments.
The anime cartoon?
Yeah, Damage was in there. Yeah. But I think we did 17 issues of Damage, which was great. I mean, a lot of those New Age of Heroes books were 6 issues, 8 issues, something like
that. That's
unheard
of for a character that appeared during that particular time.
Yeah. Funnily enough, Damage was sort of a reworking of a pitch I had done to get back to the JSA for a prospective Our Man story that would have been part of a JSA title. Damage ended up becoming a descendant of the Miraclo program and all that kind of stuff.
I love that you want to really write that book, because I'm there for it. Because that Wesley Dodds book was if that's a small taste of what you have planned for JSA.
And also Hawkman too, JSA character, right? So yeah.
So if you write JSA, you know what that means, right, Robert?
I don't know.
You wrote Hawkman, you wrote Green Lantern after Jeff Johns. Jeff Johns also had a run on JSA.
Yeah, but he's wrote everything, right? He wrote Flash.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It is unfair to say that. I don't think he never wrote Batman, just saying.
He did. Also, as we've established, I have no desire to write Batman. So.
And he never wrote Nightwing.
There you go. Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah.
And then we'll take one more question here. Were there any plans for a Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps Green Lanterns crossover, or were they always meant to be separate?
You mean the 2 books that were going out at the same time? No, we never really had plans to do a crossover between those two titles. There have been so many crossovers in New 52 that I think they wanted to really keep those things separate. And that's why Green Lanterns is primarily set on Earth for most of its run. And Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, was primarily out in space for most of its run. Just kind of kept those things separate. I did have an event-style Green Lantern story that I doubt I'll ever do at this point, but it would be cool to come back to it someday that Brian Hitch and I were going to do together. So I don't know if that will ever come around, but that would have involved the other Green Lanterns as well.
So there was the idea there.
Yeah,
I know you've got to get going, sir, but I do want to again remind people that Bad Idea is going to be now releasing their books through retailers, so you can get copies of these wonderful books, especially the new one with that amazing artwork.
Planet Death #1 comes out July 9th. Yep.
You are, oh my gosh, this is killer, man. I can't wait to see what this looks like on printed
I'm
paper.
excited to hold it in my hands for sure.
Yeah, you gotta be. Thank you again, sir. You are always welcome back. Maybe we should talk again when that first Green Lantern Omni is about to drop.
Yeah, I'm happy to come on whenever you like, man. Just let me know. Thank you to everybody who asked the questions. Sorry if we didn't get to them. I'm at Robert Venditti on Twitter. You can ask me there, and I'll get back to you. So appreciate you taking the time. It was good talking to you, Omar.
It's a pleasure, sir, and you are welcome back again. Everybody, hit that like button on the way out, and we are out of here. Have a